Oh yeah. Drink that sound in. This is the sound of adventure. This is the sound of glorious battle. This is the sound of the oppressed taking up arms to rid the world of tyranny. It also sounds like it was ripped from the official soundtrack of a 1980s Italian-directed adventure film. If I had to choose, I'd say anything starring Miles O'Keefe. This is Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen, a strategy RPG for the Super Nintendo that came out in 1993. This hidden gem remains arguably one of the most influential games in the genre, despite being very different from each of its spiritual successors. Ogre Battle was directed by Matsuno Yasumi, who would go on to direct Final Fantasy Tactics, write and direct Final Fantasy XII, produce the Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced sequels, write the story for the Wii cult classic Mad World, plus several other titles. The most notable of which is the direct sequel to Ogre Battle, Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. Any fan of the Final Fantasy Tactics franchise will immediately recognize Tactics Ogre as the laboratory that developed the mechanics, sprite style, and branching narrative based upon player decisions that would eventually be perfected in Final Fantasy Tactics. Tactics Ogre is a well-regarded classic, but I've always found it frustrating to play. It's the combination of the long attack and spell animations, plus the need to constantly micromanage the armaments and pants and hats and boots of your army, plus the stress of knowing that one mistake can kill a character permanently, plus the clunky interface where your soldiers have no agency, plus... What the fuck?! He just killed my entire team in one move! Why did I sink 90 hours into this game?! I want to go back to the original Ogre Battle. This game started it all. Let's try to piece together how a parsimonious list of bullet points combine to make a vessel much greater than the sum of its parts. It doesn't have the sweeping set pieces and moving scores of, say, Final Fantasy VI, which also came out that same year. However, Ogre Battle can be one of the most fulfilling vessels for organic storytelling of any game this side of Crusader Kings 2. Alright, you ready? Let's do this. Let's fight it out. The summary of this game sounds like a checklist of cliches. There's an evil empire ruling via terrifying military force. There are rebels rising up from the most podunk regions who fight for justice. There's a rightful king looking forward to regain his throne. There are noble generals that are loyal to a fault to their evil monarch. There's a chosen one leading the fight. We've seen this all before, but do not be fooled. All of this is window dressing to the mechanics of the game. The world of Ogre Battle is massive, with dozens of unique maps with all sorts of environmental hazards and dangers. The game has 13 different endings, a huge cast of characters, and at one point, it offers you the option to hurl an opposing army off of a floating island. This game is an achievement, albeit a nearly impenetrable one due to the limitations at the time. I first played through this game in 1995 and didn't understand why my knights murdered my character immediately after we defeated the last boss. This is because I tried to play Ogre Battle like any other video game. The Empire was clearly evil, and I defeated them without empathizing with the citizens that I had just crushed under my boot heel. I became an accidental tyrant mirroring the great evil that I had just toppled, and I only realized this, to my horror, when my most loyal knights slit my throat. On another playthrough, I was a shining paragon of justice who ended up getting banished because I was a threat to the new crowned king. How can the mechanics support such a huge variety of stories from what is essentially the same timeline? So how do these parts come together? Let's take them piece by piece. Number one, the leader. You, the player, are a chosen one. You are ordained by the stars to lead the rebel uprising against the oppressive Holy Zedaginian Empire. I'm being quite literal when I say that you are the leader. You are a person on the front lines in very real danger. But also, like most generals, you may choose to spend most of your time parked in the rear surrounded by soldiers that you don't really trust on the front line. If you die, you die. It's an instant game over screen. But just because you are the leader, this doesn't mean that you are good and pure as freshly fallen snow. At the beginning of the game, you are asked to draw cards from a tarot deck and answer personality questions. Depending on how you answer, will affect your alignment throughout the rest of the game. The brilliant bit is that the game doesn't judge you or penalize you for your answers. If you want to be evil, be evil. The world can be yours. If you want to be good, good for you. Go for it. If you want to be an evil character that becomes redeemed, or a good character that falls from grace, you can do that too. You just have to work at it. Number 2, the map. The main interface is the map of whatever zone through which your army is currently advancing. Imagine you are the general standing in a command center somewhere. You issue orders, and your aides push little figures around the map to represent where your forces are advancing, holding, retreating, and where your scouts have spotted the enemy. If an enemy sneaks past your cordon and makes it to your base, you've lost the battle, and your battered army must retreat and try again. But your reputation will suffer, and your coffers are a little lighter. There's so much information present in one simple interface. The terrain can affect the movement speed and the lines of sights of your troops. Some characters fight better in certain territories than others, so it may be worth your while to squat in a choke point and deplete your enemy's reserves. Or the battle might be a slog and you opt to send a secondary force to sweep up the flank once the main force is engaged. There are a lot of tactical decisions to make, but you are still the general in the command center. You can order your troops to rush to defend a temple before it is retaken by the enemy, but they are the ones who have to march through a haunted forest. They'll try their best to execute, but there's no guarantee that they can close that gap in time. Number 3, the orders. This one is so simple yet so brilliant. Unlike most strategy games, think XCOM or Final Fantasy Tactics, you can't simply quantum leap into the bodies of your troops and make them act exactly how you want them to act. They are not dolls for you to move around and pose as you like. You can issue orders such as attack the leader or attack the enemy with the least amount of health. This gives you enough control of the situation to keep the battle from going completely off the rails, but the soldiers will not always behave how you would expect. Maybe your intended target was too far away for them, or you didn't notice that the previous attack made a different enemy the new target. Ultimately, it makes your soldiers feel like, well, people trying to act through the fog of war. They are not merely vessels through which you execute your will. Which brings me to my next point. Number 4, the soldiers. There are certain main characters that you can recruit through every run-through of the game, but the majority of your army is a hodgepodge of randomly named characters that truly grow on you. You see, your soldiers evolve from simple bladesmen and archers into specialized fields like samurais and clerics. They become real people with war stories. I will always remember one of my leaders, a cleric named Apple, who would be carried through the sky by her unit of angels. I left her in a bad position when my scouts missed the enemy army advancing on her position until it was almost too late. Her army advanced and held the city in a desperate running battle of hitting and retreating, losing angels but keeping those who remained alive by only a thread until the reinforcements could arrive. There was genuine pride when I could afford to give her some better equipment and advance her team up the skill trees because they had been out there in the shit and beat it back. The variety of characters is staggering. You can have a unit of ghosts, nigh invulnerable to physical and magic attacks, or zombie dragons, flying worms and griffins, or mermaids and octopuses. You can even have a witch and her loyal army of pumpkin warriors. If that last sentence didn't make you intrigued, then you are dead inside. Number 5, alignment and reputation. All of this culminates into the 2 most important mechanics that ultimately have very little impact on the actual gameplay of Ogre Battle. Alignment is the traditional Dungeons & Dragons numerical measure of how good or evil a character is. A character's alignment determines which classes she may advance into, or whether she's better at fighting in the daytime or the nighttime. Also, alignment influences other members in her unit, so a haughty cherub won't like to be placed with a pack of ghouls and zombies. In fact, this cherub will eventually be corrupted by its peers and become evil. This encourages you to specialize your units and makes creating mishmash units less practical. There are items throughout the game that can influence sunset and sunrise, which is supposed to impact the effectiveness of a battle, but this effect is hard to notice in-game. The important takeaway is that alignment affects how the world sees your army, which ultimately affects your reputation. Imagine, if you will, you're a farmer in some rural backwaters town. You cringe when you think about how the current Black Queen sees the throne, but she's far away and her troops have a large appetite for grain, which has made your purse a little fatter and the winters a little warmer. You hear the rebel armies gaining strength. They even took the great city of Zenobia, and over time, the skies get a little darker with ash and dust until the rebels arrive. A great army of black armored knights and their wizards strike down the mightiest of the Imperial army in a single blow. Then, a winged man bearing a bloodstained club and his black dragons marches into your undefended glen and declares that you have been liberated by the rebel army. They collect taxes from you, murder your local lord, and move on to rampage the next province. The scenario that I just described is possible through normal game mechanics. Attacking a weaker opponent can lower a character's alignment, while an underdog can gain an alignment boost. If you level up the same troops over and over, you will not be seen as liberators as they effortlessly massacre everything that opposes them. You will, rightly, be seen as a warmongerer bringing more death and destruction in order to overthrow a flawed but stable system. Your reputation will precede you as your monsters make the first impressions with new citizens, and you decimate the Imperial armies. The population will resist your approach as best as they can as your reputation turns for the worse. On the other hand, you can rotate troops in and out of the front line, give them time to cool off and prepare for another fight, as you give new recruits a go at the front lines. You don't want to see that character that you love turn evil. You may choose to skip some provinces altogether. You may design special forces to fly in and assassinate the enemy leader so that all other battles can be avoided. This keeps you from raising your level too high, but it also reduces the death and suffering across the board. Or you could be a master propagandist that brandishes evil, powerful units like werewolves and vampires in the field. However, the citizens wouldn't know this because all the cities are liberated by an army of Valkyries, priests, and angels. The choice is yours. This choice is what makes Ogre Battle such a compelling game. It's a deeply flawed game that requires a strategy guide and a few playthroughs in order to really get the hang of everything. The major story chapters are cliché because they are supposed to be. It's easy to miss important quests, but so what? They aren't necessary or interesting. Ogre Battle reinforces the old adage, if life was just about the destination, then take a fucking flight. Victory is assured if you keep playing. Defeat is impossible. I wish more games would follow this mode. Instead of focusing on scripted set pieces, give players the tools to create their own journey, even if the endpoints are known. What matters is how you chose to get there, and the stories that you can share will last long after the memories of the Pogrom Force and the slums of Zenobia fade.